They told you it was a fire. A tragic accident. 88 souls, young and innocent, extinguished in the blink of an eye. The Sinclair Orphanage. The name itself whispers of loss, a stark monument to misfortune. But what if the ashes concealed more than just the remnants of a building? What if the official narrative, the comforting lie fed to a grieving public, was a meticulously crafted illusion? Look closer at the faded photographs, the grainy news reports. Do you see the questions that linger in the shadows? The inconsistencies brushed under the rug? This isn't a story of random tragedy, it's a carefully orchestrated silence. A silence bought with influence, maintained by fear, and guarded by those who understand the true power of forgotten history. You've been taught to accept, to mourn, and to move on. But some wounds never truly heal, and some secrets refuse to stay buried. We're going to unearth one of them. Peel back the layers of deception, one by one, until the chilling truth beneath is laid bare. Forget what you think you know. This is the story they didn't want you to hear. This is the story of the 88, and the darkness that consumed them. The year was 1932. America was gripped by the Great Depression, a time of hardship and desperation. Into this landscape of vulnerability stepped the Sinclair family, promising solace and sanctuary for orphan children. Their grand estate, nestled in the secluded countryside, seemed like a beacon of hope amidst the prevailing gloom. Donations poured in, driven by heartfelt sympathy and the desire to alleviate suffering. Yet, behind the imposing gates and manicured lawns, a different reality was taking shape. Whispers began to circulate among the local community, hushed accounts of strange occurrences, of children rarely seen outside the orphanage walls, of a pervasive atmosphere of unease that belied the outward facade of benevolent care. These whispers were quickly dismissed, attributed to gossip and the anxieties of the time. But fear, like a persistent weed, often takes root in fertile ground. And in the case of the Sinclair Orphanage, the soil was far darker than anyone imagined. The truth was not in the grand pronouncements or the carefully staged photo opportunities, it was in the averted gazes, the tight lips, and the chilling silence that descended whenever the orphanage was mentioned. The official records paint a picture of a well-run institution, adhering to all regulations, overseen by a dedicated staff. But dig deeper, beyond the sanitized reports and bureaucratic jargon, and discrepancies begin to emerge. Staff turnover was unusually high, with nurses and caretakers leaving abruptly, often citing vague reasons for their departure. Financial audits, while seemingly in order, lacked transparency, with significant sums unaccounted for. And the children themselves? Their presence within the local community dwindled over time. Initially, they were seen attending local schools and church services. But gradually, they became increasingly isolated, confined to the orphanage grounds. Visitors were discouraged, their access strictly limited and carefully controlled. The outside world was being systematically shut out, and within the walls of the Sinclair estate, a self-contained ecosystem was developing, shielded from scrutiny and shrouded in secrecy. What were they hiding? What was happening to those 88 children behind those imposing walls? The carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack, revealing glimpses of a much darker interior. Consider the psychological dynamics at play. These were children, already traumatized by loss and abandonment. They were placed in an environment of strict control, their every move likely monitored, their individuality suppressed. Imagine the fear, the confusion, the sense of powerlessness that must have permeated their young lives. This wasn't just a place of shelter, it was a laboratory of human behavior, a testing ground for methods of influence and domination. The isolation, the lack of external contact, the carefully curated routines, all point towards a deliberate attempt to mold and manipulate these vulnerable minds. Think about the long-term effects of such an environment. How would it shape their perception of the world, their ability to trust, their very sense of self? The Sinclair Orphanage wasn't just failing to care for these children, it was actively dismantling their inner worlds, preparing them for a purpose yet unknown, a destiny hidden beneath layers of deception. Now, let's examine the Sinclair family itself. They presented themselves as philanthropists, driven by compassion and a sense of civic duty. But look beyond the public persona, the carefully crafted image of benevolent benefactors. What were their true motivations? Where did their wealth originate? And what were their connections, their hidden affiliations? The deeper you delve into their history, the more unsettling the picture becomes. Rumors of occult practices, of involvement in shadowy organizations, of a lineage steeped in esoteric traditions, these are the whispers that cling to the Sinclair name. Were they simply wealthy individuals with a charitable inclination, or were they part of something larger, something far more sinister? Could the orphanage have served a dual purpose, a front for activities that could not withstand public scrutiny? The answers lie buried in old archives, in forgotten testimonies, and in the lingering unease that still surrounds the Sinclair legacy. The concept of institutional manipulation is not new. Throughout history, seemingly benevolent organizations have been used as vehicles for hidden agendas. Think of the historical examples, the religious orders that amassed immense power and influence, the philanthropic societies that served as fronts for intelligence operations. Institutions, by their very nature, provide a cloak of legitimacy, a shield against suspicion. They offer resources, infrastructure, and a network of individuals bound by a common purpose, however concealed. Could the Sinclair Orphanage have been such an institution? A place where vulnerable individuals were exploited, where unorthodox experiments were conducted, where the boundaries of ethics and morality were deliberately crossed in pursuit of a hidden objective? The scale of the tragedy, 88 lives, suggests something far beyond mere neglect or mismanagement. It hints at a systematic operation, a calculated outcome. Consider the timeline leading up to the fire. Were there any unusual events, any red flags that were ignored or deliberately suppressed? Did any individuals raise concerns that were quickly silenced? The suppression of truth often follows a predictable pattern: initial denial, followed by discrediting of dissenting voices, and ultimately, the construction of a plausible but ultimately false narrative. Look for the gaps in the official story, the unanswered questions, the convenient coincidences. These are the cracks in the edifice of deception, the points where the underlying reality can still be glimpsed. The truth about the Sinclair Orphanage is not a single event, it's a tapestry woven from threads of manipulation, secrecy, and calculated cruelty. And the fire? It may have been the final, devastating act in a much longer and far more disturbing play. The psychological control systems employed within such institutions are often subtle but incredibly effective. They operate by eroding an individual's sense of self, their ability to think critically, and their connection to the outside world. Isolation is a key component, as it deprives individuals of external validation and alternative perspectives. The imposition of strict routines, the suppression of dissent, the use of fear and intimidation, these are all tools used to maintain control and enforce obedience. In the case of the children at the Sinclair Orphanage, their vulnerability made them particularly susceptible to such manipulation. They were dependent on their caregivers for survival, their young minds easily influenced by the environment around them. What beliefs were instilled in them? What narratives were they taught to accept as truth? The answers to these questions may hold the key to understanding the true purpose of the orphanage and the fate of its inhabitants. Suppressed truths have a way of resurfacing, often in unexpected ways. A forgotten document, a chance encounter with someone connected to the past, a lingering memory that refuses to fade, these can be the catalysts that shatter carefully constructed lies. In the case of the Sinclair Orphanage, the sheer scale of the tragedy ensured that questions would continue to linger, even decades later. Family members of the deceased children may have harbored doubts, local residents may have remembered unsettling details, and former staff members may have carried secrets they were afraid to reveal. These fragments of suppressed truth are like pieces of a broken mirror, reflecting a distorted image of the past. But if enough pieces can be gathered, a clearer picture begins to emerge, a picture that challenges the official narrative and demands a reckoning. Ancient corruption is not confined to dusty history books, its tendrils can reach into the present, influencing institutions and shaping events in ways we may not even realize. Certain families, certain organizations, certain ideologies have maintained power and influence for centuries, operating behind the scenes, pulling the strings of global events. Could the Sinclair family have been part of such a lineage? Could their activities have been linked to ancient power structures, to hidden agendas that transcend the boundaries of conventional understanding? The symbolism, the rituals, the esoteric knowledge that often accompany such hidden power, these may have left their mark on the Sinclair estate, on the very fabric of the orphanage itself. Look for the recurring motifs, the subtle clues that hint at a deeper, more ancient connection. Institutional manipulation often relies on the exploitation of vulnerabilities. The desperation of families during the Great Depression, the societal indifference towards orphan children, these were the conditions that allowed the Sinclair Orphanage to operate in the shadows. Those in power often prey on the marginalized, the forgotten, those whose voices are easily silenced. The tragedy of the 88 children is a stark reminder of this dynamic. They were vulnerable, without advocates, their fate determined by those who held power over them. Understanding this dynamic is crucial to recognizing similar patterns in our own time, to identifying the institutions and individuals that may be exploiting vulnerabilities for their own hidden purposes. The lessons of the Sinclair Orphanage are not just historical, they are a warning. The fire itself remains shrouded in unanswered questions. What was the precise cause? Were there any eyewitness accounts that contradicted the official explanation? Were the emergency services delayed? The destruction of the building conveniently erased much of the physical evidence, making a thorough investigation nearly impossible. This is often a hallmark of deliberate cover-ups, the strategic destruction of evidence to prevent the truth from being uncovered. Consider the possibility that the fire was not an accident at all, but a carefully staged event to silence the children and conceal whatever was happening within the orphanage walls. The sheer number of fatalities, the lack of survivors, these factors alone should have triggered a more rigorous and independent investigation. The fact that this seemingly did not occur raises serious questions about the influence and power wielded by the Sinclairs and their associates. Think about the psychological impact of such a large-scale tragedy on the local community. Fear, grief, and a sense of helplessness can create an atmosphere of silence, where people are afraid to ask too many questions or challenge the official narrative. This collective trauma can be a powerful tool for maintaining secrecy. Those responsible for the events at the Sinclair Orphanage may have deliberately cultivated this atmosphere, knowing that fear and grief can be effective deterrents to investigation. Over time, memories fade, witnesses die, and the truth becomes increasingly difficult to uncover. This is why it is so important to remember, to keep asking questions, to refuse to let the stories of the lost be forgotten. Their silence should not be our silence. The role of media in shaping public perception cannot be overstated. In the aftermath of the fire, news reports likely focused on the tragedy itself, on the outpouring of grief and sympathy. It is less likely that they delved into the deeper questions, the inconsistencies, the potential for wrongdoing. This may have been due to self-censorship, pressure from powerful individuals, or simply a lack of resources and investigative zeal. But the result is the same: the official narrative was reinforced, and alternative explanations were marginalized. Understanding how media can be used to control information and shape public opinion is crucial to discerning the truth behind historical events like the Sinclair Orphanage tragedy. Look for the stories that weren't told, the questions that weren't asked, the voices that were silenced. That we are now halfway through this descent. The truths we are uncovering are not for the faint of heart. They challenge the comfortable narratives we have been taught to accept. This is the point where awareness solidifies, where the old ways of seeing begin to crumble. To lock in this transformation, to signal your commitment to seeking truth beyond the surface, I ask you to perform a symbolic act. In the comments section below, write the phrase, "The veil lifts," exactly twice. This will serve as a marker, a silent acknowledgement of the shift in your understanding. Do this now. The lack of any substantial follow-up investigation into the Sinclair Orphanage tragedy is deeply troubling. In a case involving the deaths of 88 children, one would expect a thorough and relentless pursuit of the truth. The absence of such an investigation suggests a deliberate effort to bury the matter, to ensure that no uncomfortable questions were asked and no inconvenient answers were found. Who had the power to prevent a proper investigation? What were they afraid of uncovering? These questions point towards a level of influence and control that extends far beyond a simple orphanage fire. It suggests a network of individuals and institutions with a vested interest in maintaining the silence surrounding the Sinclair legacy. Consider the potential for financial exploitation. Orphanages, even those with seemingly good intentions, can be vulnerable to corruption. Donations can be mismanaged, resources can be diverted, and the well-being of the children can be secondary to financial gain. In the case of the Sinclair Orphanage, the significant sums of money that flowed into the institution raise questions about how those funds were actually used. Were the children adequately cared for? Were the facilities properly maintained? Or was the orphanage a vehicle for personal enrichment, with the children serving as unwitting pawns in a larger financial scheme? The answers may lie hidden in obscure financial records, in the testimonies of former employees, and in the stark contrast between the outward appearance of the orphanage and the rumored conditions within. The possibility of human experimentation, however disturbing, cannot be entirely dismissed when considering institutions operating in secrecy and without proper oversight. History is replete with examples of unethical experiments conducted on vulnerable populations, often in the name of science or progress. Could the children at the Sinclair Orphanage have been subjected to such treatment? Were there any unusual medical procedures performed? Any unexplained illnesses or deaths prior to the fire? These are uncomfortable questions, but they must be asked if we are to truly understand the darkness that may have permeated the Sinclair estate. The vulnerability of orphan children made them easy targets for those with unethical agendas, those who saw them not as individuals but as subjects for their twisted pursuits. The concept of ritualistic practices and their connection to ancient power structures is often dismissed as fringe theory. However, throughout history, secret societies and influential groups have engaged in rituals and ceremonies, believing they hold the key to unlocking hidden knowledge and wielding greater power. Could the Sinclair family have been involved in such practices? Were there any symbols or architectural features within the orphanage that hinted at a deeper, more esoteric significance? The suppression of such information is often deliberate, as these practices are seen as taboo and potentially dangerous by mainstream society. But ignoring these possibilities means closing ourselves off to a potential layer of truth in the Sinclair Orphanage mystery. The role of local authorities in the Sinclair Orphanage tragedy also warrants closer scrutiny. Were there any reports of neglect or abuse that were ignored by law enforcement or child welfare agencies? Were any complaints dismissed or downplayed? Institutional corruption often involves the complicity, either active or passive, of those in positions of authority. Fear of powerful individuals or organizations, or even direct involvement in their activities, can lead officials to turn a blind eye to wrongdoing. Understanding the dynamics of local power structures in the region surrounding the Sinclair estate in the 1930s may shed light on why the orphanage was allowed to operate with so little oversight and why the aftermath of the fire was handled in such a seemingly perfunctory manner. The long-term consequences of suppressed truths can be profound, not only for the individuals directly affected but also for society as a whole. Unacknowledged trauma can fester beneath the surface, leading to cycles of distrust, cynicism, and social unrest. The story of the Sinclair Orphanage, if the official narrative is indeed a lie, represents a significant wound in the collective memory of the community and perhaps even the nation. Unearthing the truth, however painful, can be a necessary step towards healing and preventing similar tragedies from occurring in the future. It requires courage to confront uncomfortable realities and to challenge established narratives, but the pursuit of truth is essential for a healthy and just society. Consider the possibility that the 88 children were not simply victims of a tragic accident, but were deliberately silenced. If they witnessed something they were not meant to see, if they possessed knowledge that threatened powerful individuals or organizations, their elimination may have been seen as a necessary act. This is a dark and disturbing thought, but it aligns with the patterns of institutional manipulation and the suppression of truth that we have been exploring. The sheer number of deaths suggests a level of ruthlessness and a determination to ensure that no one survived to tell their story. The fire, in this scenario, becomes not an accident but a meticulously planned execution. The hidden agendas behind such large-scale deceptions are often complex and multi-layered. They may involve the accumulation of wealth and power, the advancement of ideological goals, or the protection of deeply buried secrets. Understanding these agendas requires looking beyond the surface level of events and considering the motivations and long-term objectives of those involved. In the case of the Sinclair Orphanage, the hidden agenda may never be fully revealed, but by piecing together the available evidence and considering the broader historical context, we can begin to glimpse the outlines of a more sinister reality than the one we have been led to believe. The psychological control systems we discussed earlier may have had a purpose beyond simply managing the children within the orphanage. They could have been part of a larger experiment in social engineering, a way to study and manipulate human behavior on a smaller scale, with the ultimate goal of applying those techniques to a wider population. The vulnerable nature of the orphan children made them ideal subjects for such experiments, as their isolation and dependence allowed for a high degree of control. The knowledge gained from such unethical practices could have far-reaching implications, potentially being used to influence public opinion, control dissent, and maintain power. The story of the Sinclair Orphanage that took 88 children and buried them alone is a stark reminder of the darkness that can exist behind seemingly benevolent facades. It is a testament to the power of secrets, the reach of institutional manipulation, and the enduring consequences of suppressed truths. You have now glimpsed the rabbit hole, peered behind the veil. This knowledge is a burden, but it is also a form of power. Use it wisely. Question everything. Trust your instincts. And never forget the 88 voices that were silenced. Their story is a warning, a challenge, and a call to awaken the truth that lies buried beneath the ashes of history. The world you thought you knew is not the world that truly is. Now you know a little more. And that changes everything.